is going on, family? It's your boy, Low Daddy, back again with another episode of Teach Us Something Cool. Now, Teach Us Something Cool, it's like a book club, but for learning cool shit. And we do this every single Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. Central Standard Time over on Clubhouse. If you're not on Clubhouse and you need an invite, reach out to me by leaving a comment below on YouTube or on any of my social profiles. I'm more than happy to spread the wealth with you if I have any invites to give that week. So how it works is every week we have a new topic to learn and discuss set by our panel and the members of our community over on Discord. If you'd like to join our Discord to enhance your learning experience, I would encourage you to do so by clicking on the link tree in the description of any YouTube videos we have, in the description of our YouTube in general, or any of my social media profile bios. It's going to be in there as well. So you can do that for free. I would definitely encourage you to do so. Hope to see you all there in the future, and I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation, which is going to be on whatever the title says below. And again, if you're on YouTube watching this, please smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, and ring the little bell next to it so you get notified every time we go live, every time we drop new videos, and we're learning something cool up in here, which should be at least once a week moving forward, and I hope to get more consistent than that moving forward as well. But for now, enjoy this video and let me know what you think in the comment section below. So, Connor, I did just start recording. This is everyone's quick disclaimer. You get it if you come up here and talk anyway, but we do record every Wednesday night discussion. It does get posted on YouTube, just for people to be able to go back and listen to it again or listen to it for the first time if they were unable to make it tonight. So do not say anything if you're uncomfortable with it being on the internet, or if you are one of our guest speakers, you can always, just request that certain things be edited out. We have a video editor for that. So let me know if that is the case here. Yeah, Tobin, if you want to give us a quick intro to this debate, I think you're more knowledgeable than myself or Connor is to give that intro, and then maybe give us a little summary of both sides of the argument before we move forward.
Sure thing. So, super helicopter overview without going into too much detail, which hopefully we'll dig into more as the conversation progresses. But basically, to anyone who pays attention to the news, you've probably seen that there's kind of two theories that are circulating out there. One, that SARS-CoV-2, which is the scientific name. So COVID is the disease, the sickness. SARS-CoV-2 is the actual virus, just to clarify. So some people are saying that SARS-CoV-2 originated in a lab, particularly one in Wuhan, China, and we'll get into that more, especially our guest speaker hopefully can shed some light on that. And then the other theory is that it was just a naturally occurring thing that happened. We call it zoonosis because zoo for animal. Basically, the theory is that this virus developed in an animal and then somehow hopped into a human host, whether that was through an intermediate host or direct contact. Kind of jury's still out on that. But basically, probably the biggest piece of evidence supporting that is the fact that SARS-CoV-2 has a 96.2% similarity to bat COVID, RATG13. And they're saying, look, it's so similar, it's basically all already there in this bat. Probably just a few basic mutations is what allowed it to jump over to people. That's, again, the super helicopter level overview.
Yeah. So, again, really good job summing that up. I think, I'm not sure what side, Adam has on this. Adam is another, person who's going to be, he's not an expert by any means, but he is my go-to science guy. So he should be pretty knowledgeable on this, and I'm hoping that we can see some counter arguments against it, because I know a lot of us, we side with the lab case in here, and we're going to hear, some stronger arguments that kind of, might solidify that case. But I'm hoping that we see some counterpoints made as well. So I don't know if anyone has a case for the nature side that they want to present, or like a strong case. That would be great to start with, I think.
So I'm Adam, by the way. I'm kind of in the middle on where it came from. I think that both possibilities have to be considered, and I don't think there's necessarily going to be a solution at any point to whether they took that original bat COVID that was discovered, I believe, in 2012 and mutated in a lab, or whether through like a few simple mutations it jumped from bats to potentially another animal and then to humans, or slowly evolved in humans to the point of the SARS-CoV-2 that we're seeing now.
Yeah, and the argument that there's a lot of different sub-arguments I've heard, but it's all kind of the same thing, is it comes from some sort of animal, whether it be a bat or was it a pangolin, right, is the other one.
Pangolin, or I believe a camel, I want to say.
Camel, that's the first time I've heard that one now.
That might be another virus within the SARS family. I can get mixed up.
I think that's
through a cobra at one point too.
That's correct. That's MERS. My bad.
And whether it came straight from a bat, that one kind of got debunked right away, from my understanding. And then what that switched to is it went animal to animal. They don't know how many animals went in between there, where they was kind of spread the virus between each other until it eventually mutated to a point where it came to humans and it was ready for just mass, virality. And yeah, I don't know how viruses are measured, but that's my understanding of the nature argument. Maybe, Tobin, what is our guest's name?
Yeah, so we have Dr. Yates here. Maybe he wants to weigh in on his thoughts, and then we might have a few questions or comments about that.
Sure. I'm Todd Yates. I'm a professor at UCLA. My background is in structural molecular biology, protein function, sequence, and evolution. I also have an older background in virology, so I know something about the subject, and I've examined some of the primary data and read some of the primary literature.
And so what are some of the strongest arguments you've heard for a case of the nature theory? Because I think, like I said, I think a lot of us are on the side of the lab theory. But what are some of the strongest points in cases that you've heard?
Well, the arguments in favor of a natural origin are largely that the argument that similar sorts of genetic changes have been observed in nature before. I can say a little bit more about the degree to which that's true and not true, but I think that's the main argument. There's no clear pathway of evolution for the SARS-CoV-2 virus, only viruses are similar in different ways, and so the argument for the natural origin is that nature is capable of all kinds of genetic changes, and so it's not impossible. So my view of the natural origin argument is more or less that it's not impossible, and so maybe that's what happened. But there's not any really substantial affirmative arguments on that side. And then the other argument that's been made for the natural origin is the assertion that it's unlikely that it came from the laboratory. So really, I think the issue boils down to whether one should believe that or not.
Gotcha. Heath, did you have a question really quick? I think you raised your hand.
Oh, no, just listening.
Alrighty.
So I could say a little bit more about sort of the nature of the genetic differences between the SARS-CoV-2 virus and the others to which it's been compared, if that would be useful.
Yeah, definitely. I think that would be useful.
I'd like to do that
as well. But real quick, Professor Yates, I know that one theory is, one animal had a specific strain of the COVID virus, and then it happened to get another strain, and they basically mutated and combined. How likely is that happened in nature versus how likely is it that it was created in a lab, given the circumstances that it is the CCP, so it's communist China, and a number of different scientists disappeared. I guess I'm going a little deep into the question, showing my bias, but can you speak on that real quick?
Yeah, well, so the China stuff, I have no information on that, but yeah, the first part of your question is exactly on point, and that's how do you evaluate the likelihood that these genetic differences arose by these alternate routes? And so I think, I don't know if it was Tobin or someone else in the introduction, maybe Tobin was saying that the closest similarity over the entire sequence for SARS-CoV-2 is a bat coronavirus that I think they call RATG13 or something. And I think Tobin said it was just a fairly small number of base mutations from there that gave rise to SARS-CoV-2. So that's not true at all. It turns out that there are two major differences in the virus, and they don't amount to a small number of mutations. What they amount to is basically acquisition of existing sequence that can be traced to similarity to other viruses. So the two places where there have been major acquisitions, as opposed to just simple, mutations and selections, are in the spike protein in the receptor binding domain, and in a second place that's called the furin cleavage site that I can say something about also. So in order for this virus to have emerged in nature, there would have had to have been basically two of these recombination type events. And I think that's important, because if you have one of these things that happens, then it's unlikely, but it happens. But to have two of these things that seem to have occurred simultaneously without evidence of any sort of intermediate virus that had acquired one but not the other, I think is an important argument in favor of the unlikelihood of it arising from a natural source.
Dr. Yates, I had a question on that. So you mentioned two specific, air quotes, acquisitions. So by that, are you referring to, for example, if you were to copy-paste something from a different genetic sequence and place it into that of the virus that we know today? Or could that also be in the form of random occurrence? Obviously, you just said that it is highly unlikely. However, you just got to keep both options on the table. I hate to play devil's advocate, but for the sake of deliberation.
No, this is sort of different. So if you have a series of individual mutations, one at a time, all through a genome, and then you have evolution, and almost all of the mutations are deleterious, some of them are neutral, and then a very small fraction are advantageous, and so you have evolution, and it goes on and on and on. That would give a very different pattern to the final structure. So what you see in the sequence of the SARS-CoV-2 is a sequence which matches, for example, the bat sequence over very much of its region, and then it matches another virus, for example, I think the earlier SARS from 2003 in the receptor binding domain, and then in a third place, then it matches, there's a segment that matches a different origin. So you can't get that by sort of random individual mutations. It's a very clear signal that the DNA came not from random mutations, but by acquisition of whole segments of DNA. That's absolutely indisputable for the receptor binding domain. It's less obvious, but we can talk about it for the second region, which is called the furin cleavage site, because it's smaller. But the whole region of the receptor binding domain matches the SARS 2003 strain, and there's just no way that could have, that there would have been, there's no way you would have had a long series of mutations that would have led to a sequence accidentally similar to the 2003 SARS virus in that region, without simultaneously having huge numbers of mutations or changes in the other regions relative to the rat starting framework. Do you get the argument there?
I do, yes.
I understand where you're headed with that one for sure.
So the question boils down to, what's the likelihood that there were sort of two of these DNA, they're recombination events basically, and so they happen in nature, fairly frequently, and they happen most often between DNA regions that are similar to each other, because then you have accidental, Watson-Crick base pairing of the wrong segments, and then you get crossover. So it actually is common to have crossover between things that are already similar to each other, but different in one place, and then the daughters acquire, a segment of the DNA from one origin and a segment from the other.
So are you basically saying there should be a kind of a breadcrumbs trail showing these mutations that there's just no evidence of right now?
Yeah, there would have to be a much greater, I think that it's 96 or something % similar to the rat DNA everywhere outside, for example, the receptor binding domain. So you couldn't have all of these mutations occur just in one piece of the DNA that happens to be the part that codes for the part you need to bind to the receptor. There would be mutations neutral, even if they were neutral. There would have been a huge amount of divergence in the rest of the sequence. You wouldn't have 96% similarity over most of it, and then have a whole region that's completely different but matches what's required to bind to the human receptor.
And Dr. Yates, sorry, I joined a few minutes late, but just for my sake and anyone else who might have joined a little bit later, is your position that based on this evidence, it was almost certainly created in a lab, or is there just somewhat of a preponderance of the evidence, or are you still undecided?
I guess I haven't sort of gotten to the point of weighing these things, but I was trying to lay out basically what's required, what needs to be explained. What needs to be explained is how you got two of these, let's call them acquisitions, in regions that happen to be required for pathogenic function. It's not like they required, some segment of DNA and it, codes for an alpha helix that does nothing, right? It's acquired two very specific regions that are very specifically tied to pathogenic function. So that's what has to be explained, or the likelihood has to be evaluated for that having occurred by the two different origins.
Sorry, Adam, go ahead.
Just to clarify for my own knowledge, the two sites or mutation sites you're talking about are the furlin on the protein spike and then the ACE receptor mutation as well?
Yeah, I wouldn't call them mutations. They're whole regions.
Okay.
You could look up how long they are. The furin site is shorter. Maybe it's a dozen amino acids, or maybe it's 8 amino acids or something. But the receptor...
I thought it was 4 to 6. 4 to 6.
Let me check.
I think it's actually just 4. I think it's the RRAR mutation.
Yeah, maybe a dozen nucleotides and fewer amino acids. So it's shorter, but the receptor binding domain is, dozens of amino acids.
You understood your question?
Yeah, I was going to ask, you kind of did a little bit of answering my question there. To put it into perspective for people who aren't as well versed, just kind of lay out, when you say unlikely and specific, how specific are we talking in reference to there's a certain number of nucleotidal changes that need to be made, and from there you have a sequence of, I don't know, I don't know exactly what the length of the protein binding region is, but you mentioned 12 amino acids. I'm not too familiar. I'm not sure how long that is, but just kind of put it into comparison of how long that region is in comparison to, what it would take to identify one length of the RNA or DNA in this case.
So I actually calculated this beforehand. One thing that I think is very deceptive, and I think it makes people very comfortable with the nature theory, is when they say, "Oh, it's 96.2% similar to RATG13." I think most people go, "Oh, 96%. That's practically the same thing, case closed." But in terms the COVID's about 30,000 pairs in length, or I guess not pairs, it's single-stranded, but so that's still about 1,680 different different nucleotides there, which translates to about 560 different amino acids. So that's actually pretty significant. I mean, we see the furin cleavage site as this critical component, and it's only 4 amino acids long. So 560 different amino acids in the whole thing can actually be a pretty huge difference.
So I think the question also was how long was the receptor binding domain. It depends on where you define the domain boundaries, but it's probably on the order of 70 or 80 amino acids or larger. And then the furin site, exactly how big the site is hard to say for sure, but it's probably the sequence required for cleavage is probably between 4 and 6 amino acids.
Much as you were trying to do earlier and put everything on the table, I was just trying to paint a better picture of, what actually needed to happen, what percentage needed to be affected, and not only what percentage in the right location, in the right orientation needed to be affected for said acquisitions to occur.
Right.
So
thank you. It's smaller for the furin site, but I think still substantial. And for the receptor binding domain, it's so large that there's just no plausible alternate explanation for that region other than it somehow came from probably the SARS 2003 strain.
Just want to do a quick room reset right now for anyone who joined late or anyone in the crowd who doesn't know. This is Teach Us Something Cool. We do this every single week. It's like a book club, but for learning cool stuff. This week's topic, obviously, COVID-19. We're going to be exploring whether it was made in the lab or not. We are fortunate to have, a lot of people on our panel right now, but mainly Dr. Yates, who's professor at UCLA, very well versed in the topic. Just to segue for a second, Professor, because I think everyone up here is on the same side. And by the way, if anyone in the audience has anything to add at any point, raise your hand. Just click the raise hand button. We'll call you up here, and you can, add something, ask a question. If you have a argument for the nature theory, that would be, awesome as well, because I'd love to hear, another point of view. But I think, to put this, I don't really understand all the science terms. I was a history guy, but something that I thought was crazy is, with no one willing to really defend the nature theory. That's something that we ran with for quite a few months in the beginning of this whole pandemic, or when coronavirus just started being talked about on social media, and I think that's largely in part to how the media painted this picture of Wuhan as some kind of like third world country, kind of part of China, where they're eating bats and whatnot. And really, when anyone who knows Wuhan, that's like it's a big city in China. It's kind of like their Chicago. Like, it's a very well put together, well established city. So to think that they're eating bats is crazy. What role do you think that's kind of played in how many nature theorists there are out there, Professor?
Well, I don't know if perception has played so much a role, and I'm sure social media has. But I think the finger, has to be pointed also to early scientific papers, including in, I think, Nature, where some scientists came out quite early and concluded that it was unlikely that this had come from a laboratory origin. And I'm not sure I have those in front of me, but there were some major papers that came out that concluded it was unlikely to have arisen in the laboratory. And my reading of those papers and conclusions is that there's very little basis for them. The conclusions were based on more or less on the idea that looking at the sequence, it didn't look like any of the known viral templates that people use for doing genetic engineering, but nothing more substantial than that. I think the other thing that hasn't come up yet is issues of plausibility, like could it be made in the laboratory? Do we have the tools to do these sorts of experiments? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. There's no doubt that it's possible to do these experiments, and in fact, we know that those experiments were being performed, or experiments similar to them, doing mutations on the S protein of different coronaviruses in the Wuhan lab and elsewhere. The NIH was funding projects on this, including at least one that had one of the Wuhan laboratories as a subcontract, I think so.
Right, that was for gain-of-function research, right?
Yeah, which basically just means you're mutating stuff and trying to make it do new things, and the new things you're usually trying to make it do is propagate in a new cell line. So you're really basically trying to monkey with it to make it so that it will propagate, bind to the right receptors, and so on. So those experiments are they were ongoing, and there's no technical hurdles really for them to be performed. So if they were difficult or it was impossible, then I think it would be easy to see what the argument might be against the laboratory origin, because you'd say, oh, we don't know how to do that, but we do know how to do it, and similar experiments were ongoing. So I don't see how the earlier papers, scientific papers, can hold a lot of weight in terms of arguing that it's unlikely.
Right, Doctor, I wanted to ask a question, and I'm glad you brought up the Nature publication, because that's where this all started. So that was published on February 3rd, 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, and one article in there, written by Dr. Shi, identified SARS-CoV-2 as the virus causing what we now know as COVID. And then he also identified a new bat coronavirus, that rat G13, whose genomic sequence is 96.2% identical to SARS-CoV-2. And in that same Nature publication, there was another article by Dr. Zhang, who also concluded that SARS-CoV-2 is the cause of COVID, but he showed that it was man-made, and most similar to two other coronaviruses, ZC45 and ZXC21, which were both discovered in military labs controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. The first article has become the most cited article in coronavirus research, and the second article, the author of that article's lab was shut down immediately after the publication, unfortunately. But yeah, so there's a lot of circumstantial questions that I have. Not just that, but it's been shown in some papers that, like, this rat G13 originated from the, do you subscribe, are you aware of at least of the Chinese miners theory, that originated from a group of 6 Chinese miners in 2012 that died from pneumonia-related illness?
I think I had read some claim like that. I don't know how to evaluate it.
So the WHO report, the very own WHO report that supports the Nature claim and not from lab, they retroactively evaluated mysterious deaths across China, because oftentimes these mysterious unsolved deaths are, I shouldn't say oftentimes, but sometimes they are, cases like coronavirus, new emerging viruses, and they did not find significant data, suggesting that coronavirus had, occurred, before 2019. So all the way back to 2012, I think the WHO report does not find those were SARS-CoV-2 cases back then.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if that weighs in strongly either way on one side of the argument, but.
So speaking of early articles that came out, I don't know, probably a few months into the whole pandemic, we had Dr. Yan defect from China to the U.S., and I believe you had looked at some of her work. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. So she made quite a lot of noise on news stations by coming forward and saying that she was convinced that it was a laboratory origin, and she wrote several manuscripts. I don't know if they were ever peer-reviewed and published, but they were posted on the internet, and those, I think one of them is called the Yan Report. You can find it and read it. And her assertion was that if you look at the DNA sequence of the SARS-CoV-2 sequence, her claim was that you can see telltale, essentially molecular cloning marks left behind by genetic manipulation in the laboratory. So what she claimed was that the two regions in question, the ribosome binding domain and the furin cleavage site, she said that in the extant DNA sequence of the SARS-CoV-2, that there are DNA sequences that can be cut by specific restriction enzymes, and that's the common method for doing DNA sort of manipulations, is to cut the DNA at particular sequences with restriction enzymes and then piece them back together. So her claim was that you could see these basically telltale signatures in the DNA. So I actually spent some time examining her claims there to see, what's the likelihood that you would by accident find sequences like this in the appropriate regions of the DNA that would have been necessary for this type of sort of molecular cloning experiments. And by writing some programs and looking at the statistics, my conclusion was that she's right in to a degree that there are DNA regions around these the ribosome binding domain and the furin region that are suspicious. They are recognized by certain restriction enzymes, but my calculation suggested that they certainly fell short of being smoking guns. And one of the reasons is that there are more than 100 restriction enzymes that are in use in the laboratory, and you choose whichever one you need to cut at a particular region. And so what she had done was she had found restriction enzyme sites that could be cut by common laboratory restriction enzymes, but it's not a very definitive finding because it's not particularly unlikely to be able to find a restriction site for some restriction enzyme almost anywhere, because there are so many known restriction enzymes that you can buy from a catalog. So my conclusion was that they were suspicious, but not to a degree that they were definitive. And so I think I remember calculating the likelihood of finding any restriction enzyme that could cut at both of the sites required was, maybe 10% or something. So it was a little bit suspicious, but not hugely so. So I found her claim there to be a little bit hard to back up. Not that it wasn't suspicious. It is suspicious, but it wasn't. It didn't provide indisputable evidence in the way that she came on TV and claimed that it did.
So you're saying there's a 10% chance of having the tools or
I guess, the circumstances necessary to cut at those sites? There's a 10% chance of that?
My finding was that there was a 10% chance, yes, that you'd be able to go into the lab, into the catalog of known restriction enzymes and find some that could cut within a certain region, several base pairs of where you would want to cut to carve out the receptor binding domain. So it was somewhat unlikely to see recognizable restriction enzyme sites, but not terribly unlikely.
But I guess my question is, like, 10% seems pretty high. It seems like you could try 10 different combinations.
No. So that's after examining all the possible enzymes. That was the whole point of the exercise. Was I took about 100 of the most popular restriction enzymes, and I looked at the DNA sites where they cut, the sequences, and then I did some simulations with randomizing DNA to find out how likely it would be that you'd be able to take a random sequence and find one of the known restriction enzymes that you could buy out of the top 100 and cut within a certain region of the regions that you needed to cut. So I factored all those things in.
Okay. Yeah, I was just meaning, like, if someone wanted to, over an extended period of, let's say, months or years, a 10% chance sounds like, a pretty substantial chance. Like, when you're talking about, if you wanted to, could you do it? I guess is my question.
Well, you can absolutely do it. Yeah, there's no question that you can do it. This was a really different question. This was the question: here's a DNA sequence that was left behind. Does the appearance of usable restriction enzyme cleavage sites surrounding the receptor binding domain, does the existence of those convenient cleavage sites prove that those were put there on purpose so that they could be used for cloning?
Dr. Yates, if I may, I just want to try and grasp this a little bit better. You're saying there's a 10% chance that there were breadcrumbs, air quotes, breadcrumbs being left behind due to sloppy genetic cutting? Is that what you're saying? No,
that's not quite the way of looking at it. There's a 10% chance that the pattern Yan claimed occurred by chance.
Meaning that there's a 90% chance that those patterns were put there intentionally to make it more optimal for cloning?
You're on the right track, but that's not the right way to think about it. The way to think about it is that the evidence that you brought forward that I examined makes it 10 times more likely than it was before that her argument is correct.
So, in your opinion, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're at least dubious, or if not, think that it's highly unlikely that this virus was, evolved in nature, just from what we talked about earlier and what you just mentioned now. So I want to get your take on kind of the overwhelming consensus in the mainstream media and also the overwhelming scientific consensus of this virus being nature-born and naturally evolving. Like, does that worry you, or is it? And you can speak as much or as little as you want on this.
No, I think it's worrisome, but I think just to sort of redirect sort of what you were saying at the beginning, we'll never, unless someone comes forward and says, yeah, I made this virus, or we find a lab notebook, no one else is going to know for sure with 100% certainty. So it's an issue of what the likelihoods are of these two events. And it's very hard to calculate what the likelihood is of certain kinds of genetic rearrangements. My view of it is it's very unlikely to have acquired two different things at the same time. It's not impossible, but it's unlikely for that to happen in nature, in my view. The argument about the laboratory origin being unlikely, I think there is no credible argument to support that. There's no, if you look at the WHO report in the last few pages where that's discussed, or even in the scientific paper that came out in Nature that said it's unlikely, there's no substance to those. There's no scientific substance to the argument that it's unlikely.
So in the final pages of the WHO report discussing why they do not believe it was lab-borne, basically the argument's the most circular thing I've ever seen. It can't be lab-borne because it just couldn't be lab-borne. That's essentially their argument. And they mentioned that lab protocols were extremely, tight. I think it's a biosafety lab rated 3, and viruses don't leak from that. That's basically their argument. So and then, presupposing that, they say because it couldn't be from a lab, it must be from nature. And now let's go find some evidence for that. And it's funny, even in the pro-nature sections of this WHO report, there's totally undermining things in their own report. Like they mention, I think pretty immediately after the outbreak, they sampled like 80,000 animals in the Wuhan area and found none of them with any SARS-CoV-2 or any sort of potential intermediate virus. They have zero clue, what the intermediate species might be, and they don't even claim to really have a general direction other than well, it's really similar to this bat. And don't worry about the fur and cleavage site because we see that in the pangolin. That's basically their argument. And it also admits in the WHO report that there is confirmation bias towards the animal, the nature reservoir theory. They admit that in their own report, that there's confirmation bias towards this position.
Yeah, that's what I gathered from the beginning arguments. Was that the side of the nature argument was saying like it's natural because it could be natural. There's a chance it could be because viruses evolve and stuff. It's not lab-borne because that's crazy. But I guess my question was like, I kind of want to know like who you're rubbing elbows with in the scientific community, because I mean it seems like, in your opinion at least, there's no proof, and it's very unlikely that it's evolved in nature. So, like, what is that? How is that? I guess, how is that being taken in the scientific community? And
there have been some reports by scientists who have been studying this more carefully than I have that have come forward. I don't have their names, but there are people that have challenged, for example, the WHO report, including some prominent scientists. So I think it's a small number that have come forward, but I think people that have looked at the argument carefully, in my view, I think have to come to the conclusion that the argument that it's unlikely that it came from a lab, that there's really, if you go look for what the reason is for concluding that, there really is none. I wondered, I thought maybe I'd say something about how to look at probability and likelihoods. If people think that would be interesting. The question came up, what does this 10% mean? What does this 90% mean?
Yeah, let's explore that.
Dr. Yates, we actually had a question from the crowd. I believe it's Dr. Groves had a question. You raised your hand.
We have just invited Dr. Groves up here. He seems like he's a guy with some wisdom on the subject, at least. He's in healthcare, and that definitely impacted the healthcare industry this year. So, what have you noticed in the past year, Doctor?
It's an interesting topic, and I'm not an expert. I'm not an immunologist. I'm just a doctor. But some of the things that puzzle me about the whole conundrum, and I read the Nature article on this, and I don't know if anybody else has reviewed that, but they make some circumstantial points that I think are fair. Obviously, there may be here folks that are smarter than I am that can refute them. But for example, some of the things that they point out are that the hook part of the spike protein that targets the ACE2 receptor, which is prominent in respiratory tissues, also involved in blood pressure regulation, that is a really tight fit. And the computer simulations that they were able to do with taking advantage of those who do research on coronaviruses would not have suggested that strategy if you were going to create. Now, these are all circumstantial, I'll grant you. I'm just arguing the other side here for fun and enlightenment.
Beautiful.
Would not have suggested that path if somebody were to set out to create a toxic virus. The other thing that they point out is that the similarity of this virus is not like the other SARS viruses that have been out there and have proven that they can be highly fatal. In other words, SARS-1 and MERS. And if one were intent upon creating a virus to attack, why wouldn't one choose a virus closer to that in order to make the attack? The next question, this is just my own, is what would be the purpose of doing this? Because it's not terribly toxic. I mean, it wreaked havoc, but it wreaked havoc across the globe. It's not targeted. It's not like there are populations who escaped completely unscathed unless they created this in New Zealand. And so, I'm just curious as to what the underlying reason for creating it might be, unless it was just a prankster, right? Like those who create computer viruses. Let's see how much havoc we can spread. And that's clearly possible. But the arguments in the Nature paper, and I'm not doing them justice, and I apologize for that, but are more compelling than other arguments that I've heard. And there's this sense that science is this exact thing, and it really is not. So when one scientist says, well, these marks are clearly here, and another scientist says, I don't see what you mean, that happens. And so there's a lot of uncertainty around this. Now, the other thing, the final point that I want to make before I step aside and let somebody educate me, is that there is no doubt that there will be more pandemics. Viruses mutate all the time. And sometimes those mutations cause them to be virulent and deadly. Nobody created, for example, the flu pandemic, that flu virus, in the early part of the 20th century because the tools and knowledge simply didn't exist. It's important to know, obviously, if this was man-made or escaped from a lab somewhere, and the investigations ought to continue. But one thing I will guarantee you is that there will be another natural pandemic that looks a lot like this one, or perhaps worse in the future. And my name is Robert, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Doctor. I think there's nobody on here more qualified or better to answer than Dr. Yates.
Yeah, those are good points. I read the Nature paper some time ago, so all the details aren't fresh, but I am a structural biologist and work with protein mutations and their positions and binding and computational stuff. I found their argument not at all compelling. Their argument about the simulation and sort of modeling studies. If I understand their argument, what they were saying is that which I think was Dr. Groves, I think actually summarized pretty clearly, was that there were changes or differences in SARS-CoV-2 compared to the earlier SARS in the the receptor binding domain, and those differences were ones that the computer simulations would not have suggested were particularly good ones. And so that was taken as evidence against that this was done in the laboratory, because these particular authors wouldn't have necessarily made these themselves. I just didn't think that really bore any weight at all. It's impossible to know exactly what sequence of mutations or reasons someone would have chosen for making mutations in a receptor binding site, or whether the virus that we eventually saw might have been passaged many times through different tissue cultures, acquiring random mutations that would have made the binding better and better to the human receptor. So I didn't understand why they thought that was a good argument against it. Just that those aren't the choices they would have made. I didn't think that was very compelling in my view. And I think that was really the crux of their argument.
What about Dr. Yates? The idea that had it been lab created or man made, that they would have made it deadlier than they really did.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. But then you have to sort of get into what intention, right? I think it's perfectly plausible if this came from the laboratory that it was just a result of a lab accident, and they happen, and there was apparently a lab move going on at about the same time, and this could have been just part of basic research, trying to take a virus of one type and see what sorts of experiments or genetic modifications or passages you would do in different tissues in order to develop a tropism for human cells. So I don't think you have to rely on a nefarious sort of intent to believe that this could have come from just ordinary research trying to figure out what sorts of things would make one virus pathogenic in another species.
And then Tim, I think you had a question as well.
Oh, I apologize. I don't have a question. My name is Tim. I am fascinated with the topic, and I've just tuned in, so I'm happy to listen. I do have a lot to offer. If I don't know exactly where the discussion has been yet, though. So if anybody has been around the whole, it's Tell Us Something Cool. So have you guys been through the whole Epstein gain of function connection to Wuhan and all that already?
We have not. That sounds like something very cool to explore.
We touch on that topic. Okay, well, shoot. To me, that's the whole deal. So, I wasn't really prepared for this room, so pardon me. I don't have all of my information directly in front of me, but I'm happy to answer any questions that people have. My name's Tim. I'm an old journalist. I dropped out of corporate news 20-something years ago, and I do my own research now. And I don't claim to have any absolute truths by any means, but I have a good idea when I'm looking at bullshit and when I'm looking at reality or things that are legitimately sourced. So there have been several things that I would encourage people to look at. One of them is the the actual Harvard University report about Jeffrey Epstein's connections to Harvard, and this was actually publicly released. And I encourage anybody to look this stuff up. Harvard was working with both Jeffrey Epstein and Dr. Fauci and Bill Gates and the Wuhan lab to do what's called gain of function research. And essentially, without getting into too much of that, that's the stuff that makes these viruses go crazy and attack people. So I'm not saying that means that they did this out of the Wuhan lab, because I can't prove that. I'm not that guy to say that. But the connections are certainly damning. And so, like I said, I wasn't really prepared to jump in right now, but if anybody wants to kind of digest that, and then if they have any questions, I'm happy to get on my computer real quick and sort of dig through what I have while people are digesting that, and I can probably answer any more that anybody has if you want to go into that direction at all. Thanks. My name is Tim.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Really quick, if anyone wants to follow along as well, I just pulled up this Harvard report that Tim just cited. You can find that in our Discord that we kind of drop links in throughout the discussion. If you need help getting there, one, go to the club at the very top, click greenhouse, follow us. We do this every single week. But two, it'll take you back to my profile, and then you just have to go to my Twitter or my Instagram, and the link is in the bio there. But this report is going to be crazy. Can you elaborate one more time, Tim, on what the exact connection is between Epstein and this lab?
Okay, well, Epstein had his own lab at Harvard, essentially, and he had his own keys. I mean, this report is like 28 pages long, and it's insane. It talks about how, and this is all, remember, after Epstein has already been convicted in 2006 of being a pedophile, so they know that he's a bad guy, of convict, he had already come up with that plea deal, which essentially he had acknowledged that he was a pedophile. So he's got these special access keys at Harvard to a lab that he's working on various things. He got a special fellowship through Harvard, and after he got busted in 2006, Harvard would no longer take Jeffrey Epstein's money. Because of his position. So there is one particular memo involving another. So basically, what he did is he detoured. He had people, including Bill Gates. There is a memo. There's something in Harvard where they say yes, Bill Gates. This is from Jeffrey Epstein, but for purposes of our documentation, we're going to say it's from Bill Gates. I'm sorry, I'm not being totally clear on that. But so they couldn't take Epstein's money, so Epstein had Gates give him the money. So to me, why is this significant? Obviously, well, you also have all these Chinese connections, including this Dr. Charles Lieber, I believe is his name, who was out of Harvard also, and he was the guy who was I think under Trump, he was busted from bringing viruses back and forth to why you see that, that. And that, there's all these. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have a question. Is there any evidence that Epstein gave Bill Gates the money to do this?
No, he didn't have to give Bill Gates the money to do it because Bill Gates has all of his own money in the world that he needs.
Despite the money, is there any evidence that Bill Gates got the lab spot that Jeffrey Epstein was kicked out of due to being convicted as a pedophile?
No, he didn't get the. I'm sorry, I'm not following you exactly. So, and I'm maybe not explaining it this well, this part of it well. But so, Harvard got $2 million. And they knew that the root of the money was Epstein, but Epstein couldn't give the money anymore. So they took it from Bill Gates because they could still happily take Bill Gates's money at the Harvard lab. There's also another MIT lab, and MIT did its entire own investigation about the Massachusetts Institute of Technology did their own separate investigation of their investigation into Epstein, and they have a woman there whose last name is Ito, and ITO, and if anybody's old enough to remember the O.J. Simpson trial, yes, they're related to Judge Ito from that trial, and that's where there's an email saying, hey, look, we can't take money from Epstein. So this is going on at MIT, it's going on at Harvard, and there are obvious obvious connections also from the Harvard, I say obvious, hopefully people know there are connections from Harvard University and the American government to the Wuhan lab to do the gain-of-function research. So all of this in the end, it definitely ties together. I don't know that means, in my mind, it was odd because the U.S. was of course blaming China, saying that it's the China virus. If you remember, the Chinese blamed us and said that we did it. So, I'm sure in China, they are probably just as think that this is the American virus, just like we think it's the China virus. And I say we think it's the China virus. That's not what I call it, but you understand the terminology I'm using, hopefully. As far as a propaganda tool, I'm convinced that they probably think we brought it there because guess what? There's also some evidence that we might have brought it there because there was also, and I love that you're laughing with me, T, man, because at least one person on here knows I'm not totally coming out of left field. There was something called the World Military Olympic Games in Wuhan as well, right before the virus broke out. And the United States sent a delegation to the World Olympic Games. And amazingly enough, the World Military Games, pardon me. And amazingly enough, none of these American military athletes could win any medals on the world stage. They had all these huge competition, hundreds of medals given away, and the Americans didn't do shit. But apparently the Chinese think that we brought COVID over there with the people that we brought who didn't win any medals suspiciously. So I know that part of it obviously is conspiracy theory. I'm here to tell you I understand the difference, just so people know. I understand hopefully people know where I drew the line there on what I can prove and what is a hypothesis. I'm not trying to draw connections to who did what purposefully, just to throw it out there that all that shit is what's going on. Thanks again. My name's Tim. I'm here. Thanks. Appreciate the topic.
Tim, I think we all appreciate that. Never need to apologize for any conspiracy theory. I think, speak for everyone, we always welcome conspiracy theory in here. That is actually insanely fascinating, everything you brought up. I know that we know on paper that the NIH has been funding or was funding that lab in Wuhan. There's a lot of very substantial evidence proving or pointing towards it originating in a lab. I think everyone up here has agreed on that thus far. We've only had kind of people present it for fun, the opposing argument, but there's only one level 4 virology lab in China. It's in Wuhan. And the NIH and the U.S. government were funding some of these studies going on in there, where we did know, because the U.S. Embassy sent they sent people to the lab to investigate because they heard that things weren't safe. And this is back in 2018. You can look that up. And basically, they did get cited for safety violations. They came back and there was 2 cables, which are just confidential text-based messages that say, basically, this lab is really dangerous. They're doing experimentations with these dangerous coronaviruses, and their safety protocols aren't up to standards. We touched on that earlier, that they don't really, there are protocols in place. They don't really care about them. But that's what we do know. And, that the other thing is, I did see that argument made that there was the Military Olympic Games or something, right? That is where the conspiracy steps in here. But, yeah, there was some stuff going on in Wuhan, and we were funding part of it, and we knew that conditions were not safe before things did get out. I just never knew that Epstein was attached in the way that you presented. And there are things online, by the way, if you guys look it up now, that do support what Tim is saying.
Thank you for doing a quick check, and sorry, I'm going to let others speak, of course, because I like to hear and listen like the next guy. That's how we all learn. Mike, thank you for that, and I appreciate being a part of the group. And I spaced, so please, whoever I interrupted, I apologize. Go ahead.
No worries. No worries. Go for it, Connor.
Tobin, if you could thank Dr. Yates for all of us. It looks like that he pieced out. He brought a lot of values and stuff. Really refreshing, point of view. And, we kind of know where he lied, but textbook professor not answering the question directly, giving an overarching, beautiful response for all of us to ponder. Thanks a lot to him. And then Tim also, that was pretty incredible. So cheers to you, my good sir.
Yes, thank you, man. Oh, I know what I wanted to say is I'm slow to get a hold of. I'm old, and so I'm figuring out how to use Clubhouse. So if anyone enjoyed that little rant, please follow me, and I will return the favor, and I'll try to figure out how to follow this club, and hopefully get back and chat with you all again. Thank you.
Yep, Tim, I tossed you a follow, so can definitely help you out there. Really quick, Preston, because I know Preston, by the way, y'all, he is riled up. He's been ready to go on this topic all day long. But I wanted to make sure Jeff and it looks like Vamsi raised their hands. Jeff, did you have a question?
Oh, hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm Chinese, currently in Canada right now.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a fascinating topic regarding the origin of this COVID-19 virus. So far, like either side, whether it's from lab or from nature, either side can convince me based on the current evidence. But the known fact is that, which is quite fascinating. We all know that the researcher in Wuhan lab, her name is Shi. What we know is that she got a lot of granting research funds from the United States. Like I think Dr. Fauci even related to this funding. Like Dr. Shi, she did caught a lot of bats in China, in the southeast part of China, Yunnan province. They separated the virus, and they transferred a lot of this kind of virus to the United States to do research in the lab in the United States. So that's a known fact, because based on the paper, which is ironically, that paper has like more than 10 authors. She is almost the last author of that paper regarding the COVID, the virus. So if this virus was released or accidentally or purposely from lab, I would assume that both China and the United States will be connected for this activity. That's just my theory. I'm not sure whether it's right or not, but the only part we know is the fact that China, Dr. Shi got this very similar virus and transferred this to United States and do a lot of research in the United States.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that's something that, well, I know Preston agrees on, and I agree on that. I think that they're both to blame for this virus. We do know, as you stated, everything you said is, from my knowledge, factual. The United States was funding operations over there. They did know things were unsafe over there, and I don't know whether it was accidental or on purpose, but it did get out of the lab, it looks like, and this past year has been the result of that, and neither China or the U.S. is willing to take blame on that, obviously. So both are pointing fingers, both are pointing to evidence of pretty much anything besides it coming from a lab. Like you saw the first 3 months, even the World Health Organization came out and basically said that there was no reason to investigate it coming from a lab, and that theory was not going to be correct. It wouldn't be worth your time, essentially, to investigate it any further. And the more you investigate it, the more it's like, wow, there's a lot of evidence that backs this up. There's not so much evidence backing up what the nature theory suggests. So I do think it is two people, or two countries in this case, responsible.
Yeah, so one thing that kind of is critical to this discussion when talking about the lab, and it came up a little bit when Dr. Yates was still here, but that was the, we're kind of weighing in on the intent of why were we doing this research in the first place, and, I think our other Dr. Groves mentioned that Nature article about, well, if you were trying to engineer a virus, it would have been done differently, and that assumes the intent, which was to create a bad virus, and that is, at least in my opinion, not why this happened. It was because of this term that got tossed around, I think, once or twice in the talk that we didn't really elaborate on, and I don't know if everyone knows what it means, but it's called gain of function research. I think it's really critical to understand what that is, because it's kind of the key as to why are labs even playing around with viruses. And kind of the answer is we're trying to head them off. We have, and Dr. Groves mentioned something that was spot on. There will be more pandemics. That is absolutely true. And I really hope that all the ones in the future are, natural born. But he's completely right. There will be more pandemics. And what a lot of this gain of function research is doing is looking at viruses that are probably going to show up in humans probably over the next, 100 years or so, which happens to be bats lots of times because their immune system is built in a way that makes them excellent animal reservoirs. And because they're mammals, they're already close-ish to us humans. But this gain of function research, the whole idea is, let's pick a virus, let's, just like the name sounds, add a function to it, usually one to make it infectious towards humans, and then let's try to deal with it before it even becomes a real virus. So if in the future it ever does, we're already ready for it. That's part of the idea. Or so we can understand virus cellular pathology better. So I think that's why Wuhan was investigating this. And it is dangerous because there are risks of lab leaks. And we were researching coronaviruses from bats, and Congress made it illegal because it's dangerous. So we contracted out to China to basically finish the research. But I think that's important to understand, one, why, and two, that it doesn't necessarily have to be a nefarious purpose.
I think another thing need to be noted is that, WHO already investigated the Wuhan lab. They just recently sent a delegation with the researchers from all over the world to do a very good investigation to the Wuhan lab. I think the Wuhan lab is the only P4 lab in China. But interesting part is that, which I don't know why, no country want to do the investigation in the lab in the United States. And I think if they're really serious about to investigate the origin of this virus, they should go to the United States to investigate their lab too. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, Jeff, I'm under the impression they were actually doing that at a lab in North Carolina, doing this sort of SARS research, and like manipulating these virus that Tobin claims they were just playing around, and they were just being very good Samaritans by preparing us for future pandemics. But then they were doing, I don't know what they were doing, but someone caught wind of that we were playing around with coronaviruses in North Carolina, and they were like, what the heck? We can't do that here. Let's ship it off to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And was the origin of that research, when it began. So I agree with you, Jeff. I think the U.S. is just as implicated in this as China is. I guess to add on to what Tim was saying, so I guess the overwhelming consensus was during this chat, we had Dr. Yates in earlier, another doctor. Yeah, Dr. Groves, he's still in here. What's up? The overwhelming consensus has been that this was, at least the evidence points to this being man-made. So now I guess the next kind of iteration of this debate is whether it was made, accidentally, like a couple of doctors playing around with coronavirus, and they go, oops, like one's escaped, and it's super deadly, so we should take very extreme and premature measures to lock down the world. And I guess that's where we're at. We're arguing whether it's was released in a lab for nefarious purposes or on accident. And I wanted to add on. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'll let you go ahead and finish first.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to add on to what Tim was saying about Epstein and Bill Gates' connection to all this and their funding of all this. And we know Epstein's a bad guy, right? Like, I would classify pedophiles as bad guys. That's just me.
I don't think anyone in here is going to argue on behalf of Epstein. But continue.
Okay, cool. But when it comes to Bill Gates, I mean, he wears glasses, so he's smart, and he's built like a snowman, so he's harmless, right? So actually, and it's just weird to me that Bill Gates has become the doctor of the world. Like, we kind of defer to him, even though he has no medical experience. And it's just very weird to me that he's so obsessed with vaccination and with, I guess, medicine in general. But I think there's some clues when you look at his parents. So, did you know Bill Gates' dad founded Planned Parenthood?
With Margaret Sanger.
He founded Planned Parenthood, and in the original documents written by Margaret Sanger, he was pretty much trying to prove that brown people were inferior and was actually targeting brown and black people. This is in, don't trust me, just please look this up. It's in the original Planned Parenthood documents, written by Margaret Sanger, funded by Bill Gates Sr.
And the Nazi Party. Don't forget about the Nazi Party.
Right, so that's the other thing I was about to mention. The dad was important, but I think the mom was more important. Bill Gates' mom. She was a key board member on the board of IBM. Thomas Watson, the founder of IBM, pretty much one of the main inventors of computers. He started the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute of Eugenics. And eugenics, I guess, refers to planned, what do you call it?
It's the extermination of
the promotion of a superior race.
Racial purity, yep.
Yes, and the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute actually funded Hitler. And the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute was funded by and started by Thomas Watson, Nobel Peace Prize winner, and on the board was Mrs. Gates. So I guess he just kind of takes after his parents with his obsession with medicine and vaccination. I don't know. And he also
two things real quick. One, I guess I'll just leave this open. It seems like the conversation's moved forward. But if anybody does have questions, because Dr. Yates had to leave before we really got to wrap up this part. But if anyone did have questions about that restriction enzyme and the probability of that being a natural occurring sequences that we found in the genetic analysis of SARS, I'm happy to circle back to that. But it seems like the conversation's moving forward, so we'll comment on that. Again, Dr. Yates had to leave, but if he was still here, I think he could comment on why Bill Gates is so concerned with vaccines, and so can I. And that is, I wholeheartedly believe the, proverbial end of the world will be brought on by microorganisms. And practically anybody in life science will agree, and that is why vaccines are important. And I'm aware of a lot of these very questionable connections of the Gates family and some of their previous funding. World War II history is actually like my favorite thing in the world, so I'm aware of all that. But regardless, Bill Gates is onto something, and that's vaccination. It is, I know everyone's talking about climate change as the next biggest worry, and up for debate. That's next week's talk, whatever. But what everyone should agree with is microorganisms need to be the big worry. And believe me, I'm not like a Fauci COVID promoter. I actually think the lockdown was crazy, but microorganisms, viruses, bacteria, that is a very serious threat, and that is why people like Bill Gates are very engaged in vaccination programs around the world.
Oh, Tobin, that's a fascinating perspective, and I appreciate it. I didn't realize I was actually like, now it sounds like I hijacked a medical conversation with a bunch of with a bunch of out there stuff. But I will say, just from my perspective, it still sounds like if I had a choice to worry about people who have a history of dealing with eugenics, and like Bill Gates brags about depopulation, I worry about them more than I do microorganisms personally, because microorganisms haven't wiped us out yet. But people have seemingly done and continue to do a better job. But thank you again for your medical perspective.
I love it. We've got opposition, people. This is awesome. I think also, to kind of piggyback off what you were saying as well, Tobin, a large reason of why he's so obsessed with the vaccines, and I apologize if someone went over this. I was gone for about 2 minutes. I think someone asked earlier as well why they even study this stuff in the first place, or why they would be creating these mutations in this Wuhan lab. And it's for reasons like that, where they want to see how, or be able to predict how a virus could mutate, to a point that could be catastrophic if it got out into actual population. Fortunately, this virus, although it was deadly and it did, definitely impact our society, obviously, it wasn't catastrophic, fortunately. But that's why they do this in the first place. And it's to make treatments and vaccines in advance before anything like this would ever, hit our population, so that they'd be ready for it. Yeah.
Yeah,
You don't think COVID was catastrophic as the response to it?
No, I mean, I thought that everything was handled, pretty poorly. Obviously, I obviously had my own views on it throughout the entire pandemic. Not gonna, harp on my own views right now. I want to make this kind of, more objective than it is subjective and opinion based. But yeah, I don't think it was near catastrophic that they thought. Like in the beginning, the videos you would see online, it made these people in China look like zombies. And, I think everyone thought we were just going to have everyone walking around the streets keeling over. They're also talking about how 10% of the population is going to get wiped out. And what we saw as time went on and, the data set started to pile up, that isn't even close to what happened. I talked about it. I mean, I'm a young, healthy 25-year-old. I got COVID. It wasn't even in my top 10 worst flus. Obviously, I'm healthy. I don't fit into the demographic that it was supposed to impact, right? It was supposed to, we knew that it was going to be people who were overweight, people who had pre-existing health conditions, and that's exactly what, how it played out. The mortality rate was lower.
I think that's awesome because, I don't know, you summed it up so well just there. I was one of those people. I mean, literally, I was writing letters to, I'm a bit of an alarmist, so I actually was reading about a strange novel virus all the way back to the end of November. And, to anyone who knows virology, there's going to be a problem when the novel virus is introduced. So all the way back in November, I was writing letters to the school district, to college presidents, that we need to shut down and brace for war. And, they all thought I was crazy. And then a few months later, they're like, oh, sorry, we ignored you. And, I full-heartedly believed we were going to have, by this time, several billion infections and 10% of the population was gone. I completely believe that. And the reality was that those assumptions were based off of a tiny, what is the word?
Samples.
A small group of samples. Yeah, samples. Thank you. And as the data increased, we realized, okay, this is not the bubonic plague. We're not going to lose 30% of our population. But yeah, I think that arc that you just described was very well articulated, and I certainly fell victim to it early on as well.
Real quick, Sledge, you made a lot of great points, and Tobin, you also made a lot of good returning points. Letting people knowing that they have our best interest in mind is one way to look at it, and then looking at past occurrences with facts and lining up all of that's great. I know that Vamsi has been waiting to speak, and I know he's going to have something interesting to say. I don't know which side he's going to take. I think I have an idea, but I think we should open the floor up to him and hear what he has to say.
Hey guys, by the way, can you guys hear me?
Oh, we got you loud and clear, Bombs.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I think my argument for it is, and I think everybody made great points, right? Now, my entire argument is whenever you talk about anything scientifically, right? There's obviously going to be evidences that point you, one direction or the other, right? The reason why, any scientific paper or any scientific process, before it's accepted into a theory, right? Whenever something is a theory, that means it's the maximum level of, a hypothesis can get to, that is widely accepted, right? And my biggest problem that's happening is, it hasn't gotten to that point, right? Yet there are a lot of people, who are reading these peer-reviewed papers, right? And coming to a conclusion and writing an article about it, right? Swaying the population one way or the other when we don't have, right, enough definitive arguments to actually convince the wide variety of the scientific community to agree to it as a fact, right? And I think the entire world has a problem of saying, I simply don't know, right? I think that's kind of my point to it. Now, I do want to recognize, right, that these researchers probably don't have an evil intent, right? If you look at the vaccination, how fast we were able to produce one, the mRNA vaccine, it's a scientific breakthrough that's been studying for over 15 years now, right? The point is, somebody recognized that we will have a novel virus or disease that's going to be spread out there, and we need to be able to handle it, right? So this mRNA vaccine, the concept is, someone can upload, the genome to a cloud server somewhere, and you could actually program your own cell's machinery to produce, these proteins, these spike proteins, so that your body, is trained to fight it as quickly as possible, right? And so that's kind of what I wanted to say.
I'm going to bet every dollar I own that you are some sort of software developer. When you said upload RNA, I'm like, oh, okay.
No, Vamsi is, he's a software developer. Me and him actually went, back and forth on this topic for more than a few hours when I was in California. But it's something that, Vamsi he's pretty passionate about. He knows a lot about as well. So, I'm happy to have him up here talking with us.
But really, that's what happened, right? So in the early days, when the vaccine is still being spread, somebody from China did upload the genome into a...
Oh, yes, Vamsi, sorry. To clarify, I wasn't knocking you at all, and in colloquial terms, you were completely spot on. It's just the term upload really got me. It's just not something a biologist would say, but, you were totally spot on conceptually. I wasn't trying to knock you there.
Yeah.
So, I guess to take that out of software engineering speak and put it back into biology speak, when you say upload, you mean that somebody designed and or handcrafted specific sections and specific segments, or what exactly is it that you're getting at there?
No, what happened was when the virus was still early in its day, a lab literally took the genome, they scanned it, right? And then they were able to send it digitally to various different labs around the world to do research to produce a vaccine, right?
Got it. They quite literally uploaded it. Understood.
They quite literally uploaded it.
That was the terminology bleeding into the conversation, or if it was a literal. Okay, yeah, understood.
Yeah, well, what happened is that during the early stage in Wuhan, the doctors found, this, the symptoms is very different and SARS-like, and they sent the virus to the P4 lab in Wuhan because it's the same city, right? So they found, this is a new virus, and they got the genome, and then they upload this genome to WHO, I believe, and then they start to develop the diagnosis tools and also the vaccine based on that result.
Yeah, pretty much. And that is neat, the modernization of science, that we're able to do that. Not so long ago, someone would have had to fly a sample across the world, and it would have had to been resequenced at a different lab. So, thank God for the modernization of science. It is pretty fantastic.
Speaking of along the science lines, would it be out of bounds to direct the conversation for a moment to this brand new Stanford study declaring that masks are worthless?
So this is one of my favorite.
Worthless.
This is one of my favorite topics. So excuse me. I attend a university in Bay Area, California. Bay Area, California is probably the most locked down part of the United States at this point. So I'm surrounded by academics and other people that are wholeheartedly invested in the mask theory, and I am not. So, and in order to make a stand as kind of a soldier behind enemy lines, I've spent a lot of time reading this. So my executive summary is: here's the thing, masks work. They have ratings, and 95 means it's 95% effective at, particles between, what is it? I think 20 microns. So they're effective if they're used correctly. Now, using them correctly is actually very difficult. You have to ensure that there is a perfect seal. You have to ensure that you're not touching the mask, because if you touch it, now your hands are contaminated, and blah 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 blah. So essentially, that Stanford study, which I read, was not so much commenting on the efficacy of the mask, but the efficacy of the user to wear it properly, which doesn't happen. So
let's see. With all due respect, let me read briefly from that, and maybe we can let the people here decide if that's the way they read it. I'm reading from the conclusion here from this study, which doesn't represent all of Stanford University, mind you, but it was posted on the National Center for Biotechnical Information government website. That's a branch of the National Institute of Health. It's brand new, so I'm thinking it might not be the one that you read, because here's the.
No, I read it, and
okay. Well, hold on, please.
Well,
from the conclusion, from the conclusion of that study, I'll read directly. The data suggests that both medical and non-medical face masks are ineffective to block human-to-human transmission of viral and infectious disease, such as SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19, supporting against the usage of face masks. Wearing face masks has been demonstrated to have substantial adverse physiological and psychological effects. These include hypoxia, hypercapnia, shortness of breath, increased acidity and toxicity, activation of fear and stress response, rise in stress hormones, immunosuppression, fatigue, headaches, decline in cognitive performance, predisposition for viral and infectious illnesses, chronic stress, anxiety, and depression. Long-term consequences of wearing face masks can cause health deterioration, developing and progression of chronic disease and premature death. Now, given that, I think that it's fair that people are skeptical of anyone that claims to have, as the last people said, any absolute information. I mean, it seems crazy that we would defer to people like Bill Gates who are coming up with these public policy decisions that are based on their personal philosophy more than science. Thank you.
And I do want to give Tobin or Travis a chance to respond to that in a second. Really quick, Connor, can you throw a link in the Discord to that Stanford study just so we can pull it up here as well? Because I do want to dive into that. And then also to back up Tobin here, San Francisco, when I visited, it is, the most locked down place I've visited in the country. It's the only place I've been in the past year that I've gotten 6-footed. But not to make it a joke, Tobin, I do want to give you a chance to respond, and then Travis, you as well.
Before you respond, I would like to say something, right? Again, this goes back to my argument. Now, this study was published, but it's not peer-reviewed. And the reason why you cannot take an unpeer-reviewed, study as a fact is because you need the greater scientific communities to look at how the experiment was conducted and eliminate as much bias out of it as possible. And, unfortunately, I don't exactly know, what the state of that, study being peer-reviewed and accepted as fact, right? That's why we can't make public decision based on a study that's still going through that process. When you make a public policy, you have to consider the risk. Right?
I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure either if it's been peer reviewed. The news article that I read said that yes, it has been peer reviewed.
Real quick, Tobin, I have some inside info. I actually got this article sent to me in a group chat earlier today, and then immediately after, someone followed up with an Associated Press article saying that the study lacks evidence on mass, isn't linked to Stanford. I haven't read either. I've just read the titles. Both of them are posted in the Discord currently. You can make your objective decision after reading both. I'm sure that there are claims in both that hold weight. This is the reality of the world that we live in right now. And you need to be able to make your own decisions based on what you read. And we provided it for you in the Discord. So join the Discord, take a look, and then Tobin, take it away.
Yeah, so Vamsi was spot on. It is not peer reviewed yet. Unless that happened in the last day or two, it's not peer reviewed. The one caveat to that, this is a review article, not a true study article. I don't believe he claimed to do any actual study himself. Rather, he looked at evidence from a lot of other studies that have been peer-reviewed and then basically, summated it in his review article. So review articles are, slightly less in need of peer review because they didn't actually do any study themselves. But Vamsi is totally right. It's not peer-reviewed yet. I believe it was a doctor from Stanford University, but I do not believe it was a Stanford-sanctioned article. If you care about the clout, I guess that matters. Science should be science, regardless of who it comes from.
Was it a single author?
What was that?
I'm questioning whether it was a single author or a group of scientists. Typically, even reviews of peer-reviewed studies are not done by a single person.
Yes, I believe it was a group of authors. The first author being from Stanford University. of the other authors. Maybe I articulated my point poorly as I tried to instill dramatic effect, but I actually agree with the findings of the articles in that masks are not effective as a pandemic preventative tool. What I was trying to say was masks are effective perhaps in a lab setting or a clinical setting where the users are trained properly and where you're using the right mask. Quite honestly, your bandana, or pulling your shirt collar up isn't doing anything. Surgical masks have a very low efficacy rate as well, but there are certainly masks like N95 that do work, again, if they're used properly, and just the reality is people aren't trained, they don't know how to use them properly. I think the funniest example, you see people wearing gloves and then they touch their face. It's like, what is the point of the gloves? Obviously, people aren't understanding that. So kind of at a meta-analysis level, yeah, I think he's right. The masks are ineffective.
So, question, Tobin, is the effectiveness of surgical or plastic masks, has that been peer-reviewed? I guess it's for Vamsi too. Has the efficacy of plastic masks, surgical masks, been peer-reviewed? And if not, why are they making us wear them?
A great question, and that's almost more of a political debate. Actually, it is more of a political debate. But yeah, surgical masks have been reviewed. And yeah, so basically how they test those, and it's been very peer-reviewed, tested a million times, a million different ways. They strap them to a mannequin, and this mannequin has a sort of artificial airway and a artificial breather that can simulate normal breathing, talking, coughing, and then through various collection means they look at how dispersed particulate matter is coming from the mouth. And surgical masks, they have a statistically relevant effect, but it's not huge. Things like N95 masks. So N95 is a rated mask. In order to be called N95, it means the mask had to be studied and they certify it because it works. Again, if used properly. So why are we wearing these surgical masks when everyone's wearing them improperly and when their efficacy is still pretty low even when used properly? I don't know. That's a political question that I have lots to say on, but I'll try to stay scientific.
I just want to add a piece of information. I don't know if anybody in this room knows. The dormant period could be weeks or more than a month from the time that the person contracted the virus until the person has any symptoms. So it's really hard to track using the mask if that person had contacted with anybody to see if the mask is really working.
You're probably right.
I think in the early days, I read somewhere that masks are not really designed to keep you from getting the virus. It's more designed to keep you from spreading the virus. Again, I would want to get the doctor's opinion on it if he's still on the call.
Yeah, it just seems weird. That's something that's not been peer-reviewed and has been disproved by many studies is generally accepted.
There were decades of peer-reviewed studies that show that masks were worthless even before COVID. I mean, there was one by Skinner and others, which was a review of all the evidence. I mean, that to me, that's the best way to do it, is you review all the evidence. You take all the peer-reviewed studies, and you look at them, and you decide what the overall, it's a meta-analysis. And they have decided, even in hospital settings, it's been proven that when they take off their medical masks, there are even fewer infections, if anything. It's very the statistical significance is next to nothing. But if anything, they show that there are fewer infections. So why did they do it? Who knows, Preston? But, your guess.
Yeah, I have to completely agree with Tim there. interesting. One article's theory, because it seems perplexing, that even a low efficacy mask would actually result in higher infections. And they one possible theory for that is because masks are uncomfortable. So what do? You touch your face, you adjust it, and every time you do that, you're putting yourself more at risk. So yeah, I have to agree with Tim right there.
I think what you're trying to say is, in a perfect world, if you wear a mask and never touch your face and do your task perfectly, it is going to be effective. But because humans are not perfect, they are gonna touch their face, they are gonna adjust the mask, and that's kind of reduces its efficacy. Is that what you're saying?
Spot on, right there. Yep.
If only humans were robots.
And I think this is also what, you and I, Vamsi, discussed. People ask why all the time. And, I'm one of the people who asks why too. And I told you, I feel really bad for Dr. Fauci. I feel really bad for any, congressperson who's been in power for the past year. They were put in a situation where no matter.
I don't feel bad for any congresspeople in the history of anything.
Okay, well, let's leave the political views aside here. But they were put in a situation where they were in a lose-lose regardless, no matter what decision they made when they didn't have any data or any reason to go, off of what they were saying. Some people picked one side, other people picked the other side, whether that be the masks, whether that be locking down your state, whether that be, mandating masks, mandating vaccines, whatever the case is, right? They were put in a situation where they didn't have any data or any study to back it up yet because they just didn't have time. So no matter what they picked, they were in a position where they were going to be wrong. Whatever they did, people could point to them, and that could be a reason why they don't get reelected. Or if you're Fauci, I don't doubt that he's an expert, but a lot of what he's been saying, for the past year on national TV, all over the media, a lot of it has come out or turned out not to be correct. And then he has to come out later and contradict himself, and it puts his credibility in question here when it shouldn't be. I do believe he's very knowledgeable on the topics. I do believe he's an expert in what he studied and what he does for a living. But due to the circumstances, people had to make calls and decisions as leaders that, didn't have a lot of substance to go off of.
No, what's unfortunate is that they're making the decisions to keep their asses in their seats. Okay, Fauci's been the medical doctor for the government or the White House or wherever the hell he's doing it for like 30 years. Okay?
More.
Oh, yeah, even more.
Since AIDS in the 80s, I think.
Yeah. So, they make these decisions to make sure that the money keeps funneling in, to make sure that they still have their positions of power within government. It's a whole different rabbit hole, and it's not for you and me. It's not objective. It's simply to make sure that the masses continue to do what they say and that they can continue to get reelected.
I actually think I was speaking to Law about this fact. I empathize with Dr. Fauci, and the reason behind it is I've been in his shoes in a completely different industry, right? I've been in a situation where I had to deal with an issue, right, that had to go out to, the public, and it's a constantly evolving situation, right? And I've been in a situation where I had to give an answer and speak to uncertainty when I know myself I don't have the answer to that. I just need more data. I need more insight to be able to come to my conclusion, but the pressure was me to give an answer almost right away, just so that, whoever the parties that I'm associated with, they lose least amount of money as possible, right? And typically my question to the government is, why was Fauci not, why didn't he have somebody who can do PR go through that and answer in a way where he's not sounding like, there's a definitive answer, right? Rather, like explaining transparently what's going on. Hey, this is a highly, it's a continuous situation where it's changing constantly, but this is what we know right now. And I feel like that wasn't made. And also, his words were also taken out of context and, by the media and everything like that. So I completely empathize with Dr. Fauci, and I think that's my stance on that.
Hey, Vamsi, I think, you know, in my mind, Fauci already is the PR guy. You know, he's not doing the nuts and bolts science. He's there to just be the mouthpiece. And yeah, he was there in the 80s when the government scared the shit out of all of us and basically had us thinking that if we shook hands with somebody who had AIDS, that we could get it and die. That's where we were back then in the beginning of that. And I'm sorry, Jeff, Preston asked a good question before, the why. Why would they do it? Why would they make us wear masks? And my original theory in the beginning, I told my father, was that, you know, you always have to look at who benefits. So who's making money because we're wearing masks? Well, beyond the people who are actually producing masks, which is an obvious huge money maker, and the people who are making money producing the vaccines, the small businesses were killed. So I'm emotional about this too, Tobin, because, or not too. I know I'm not saying you're emotional. Sorry, I'm emotional about it because I live in the Bay Area too. That's the way I should have said. I'm in Berkeley, so this has been personal for me. I've watched all the local businesses get crushed here, and to me, that's unfortunately the end game, or has been the game. You know, all of the local businesses were shut down under the guise that they're not safe. You can't go into the little mom and pop shop. You can't go into the restaurant because, you know, that we don't know what's going on yet. But we have to have Costco open. You know, we have to leave all the Target, that has to stay open. Whole Foods right down the street, of course, we're going to keep that open for you. But we're going to have all these regulations, and we're going to make it so onerous on the businesses like Amazon. But guess what? They can afford that shit. You know, they can afford to hire more security to make sure no one goes in without a mask. They can afford to put the little stickers on the floor every 6 feet. They need plexiglass. They got plexiglass now at Whole Foods. You know, but the small business can't do all that stuff. So all those people get crushed just because we have to wear masks. And that's only the beginning of it, not to mention our personal liberties. And just think of the kids who are growing up wearing masks. That's what crushes me, man. I'm 55. I'm glad my life is mostly past. Because when I was actually living, I mean, I would be going nuts right now if this was... I mean,
yeah, Tim, I agree with you that there's been a lot of negative effects of COVID and the policies that the government has created around it. But I guess... what are you asserting that, or who are you asserting that intends to cause the downfall of all of these small businesses? Like, who wants to destroy the small businesses of America?
Well, I mean, the people who are benefiting, so the Jeff Bezos, for example, I mean, that's pretty clear. He owns the media, so he owns the Washington Post, right? And if you own the Washington Post, you control the information flow. And if you own Whole Foods, you also control the food flow. And if you own Amazon, you also control the flow of all other goods. So all of a sudden we have a guy who can write in the newspaper that there's a shortage of something and then create a shortage of something. You know, if Bezos wants to make sure there's no toilet paper, then there's going to be no toilet paper. And we're all going to have to deal with it until we figure out a way to make toilet paper at home or use whatever they use in the Middle East that I'm still extremely curious about. As a white guy, I've never had some little tool to carry around that makes toilet paper, you know, obsolete. But apparently there is such an animal, and pardon my ignorance for being a wise ass, you know. So,
I definitely could see the dangers of one man owning a lot of different pieces of the media and industry that can help control the industry. But I mean, I feel like we're getting into a lot of conjecture here. Like, is there any actual connection that actually happening?
Well, yeah, he made ass tons of money because of the lockdowns, and so did Bill Gates, who's another.
But correlation does not equal causation, right?
No, of course not. But somebody asked why. right? Why are we being made to wear masks when there's no logical or scientific reason to do so? So when there's no scientific reason to make people do something that they don't want to do and is really against their best interest, you have to look at why it's being done. And so when Bill Gates is on television every day on MSNBC. I don't know if people even remember anymore that it's MSNBC because it's the Microsoft National Broadcasting Company. That's what MSNBC means.
What?
Because way back in the day, Bill Gates put up a ton of money with the National Broadcasting Company to start a brand new network on cable. Because you and me can't start a brand new network on cable, but Bill Gates could back then. And so he's got his own TV network. So all of a sudden he's controlling some of the same things that Bezos is controlling, because guess what? Gates controls the world vaccine flow, right? Or he's got those production lines down because he's now, of course, I'm not saying that, am I saying this is some grand conspiracy? No, but if you want to look at how and why this might be happening, that's certainly not something, I don't think, to just say, oh, well, it definitely couldn't be all that. I mean, if you want to play that way, then I always kind of say, you see, then not you personally. I think people who look at all the evidence and deny it, I would say you're a coincidence theorist.
Well, but I think it's always good to look at the benefactors of an unfortunate situation and as potential suspects for causing that situation. But I mean, unless there's any evidence to actually support that claim, I don't think it's really worth claiming.
I have a hypothesis, right? I really think that government is sort of set up in a unfortunate situation, right? They have to figure out how to solve a problem, right? And they have to come up with one solution that fits everybody, and they have to release it at 100% scale day one, right? And this is kind of like an impossible task. And you know, in the private sector, you know, we tend to build a solution, and we realize that, you know, day one it might be 10% effective or 5% effective. And the government is way too slow to make any sort of change to their policy. And so it does create like a detrimental impact when they have to create a single national policy that sort of runs across the entire giant nation and expect it to solve a problem when every single circumstance in every single little area is different. Right, and so I think you know, you can't specifically say that, you know, Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates. By the way, Jeff Bezos left Amazon at this point. He's focusing all his money, putting it on Blue Origin, which is a space company, right? And so, you know, like, you can't definitively say that, you know, they're here to you know, destroy us. Right?
I'm sorry, Jeff. Did you say Jeff Bezos stopped taking his profits from Amazon?
He left Amazon. He's no longer a CEO, and is slowly selling off stock to fund his Blue Origin company, which is, you know, obviously there's a law against you selling all of your equity all at once of a publicly traded company. But yeah, he's slowly selling $2 billion here and there and funding his other company now.
He is still chairman of the board and able to pay himself whatever he feels as chairman of the board, which is important to note.
Yeah, take it easy on the billionaires, guys. Their lives are hard.
I think, you know, it might not be saying, you know, Bezos and Gates are for sure, you know, pushing this agenda. It'd be helpful, you know, the same can be said when they're the ones who are cheering on Congress to pass higher taxes or higher corporate taxes, right? Why? Because it keeps the little guy down. The only way you can stay on top, besides for progressing your own company and involving, is to crush the little guys who are trying to come for that top spot. So it would be, you know, kind of in line with that. I don't think Tim is saying that this is for sure, you know, going back to Bezos and Gates, although it's obviously been beneficial to them. But it's more so, you know, a theory that I think he's bringing up, unless I'm, you know, misunderstanding.
No, I'm not saying for sure anything. I'd say more likely though. It's if I had to blame anybody, I'd say, okay, where did this whole mask thing start? If we're looking at, because that was where I went with that. That was the jumping point. Was Preston asking why the masks when there's no science behind it, and so in my memory, the masks started here in California. And that's where it all went. So to me, the idea then becomes, okay, who was responsible for that? Who controlled that decision? Well, it was kind of Gavin Newsom, I guess, ultimately. But then it's bigger than that, certainly. It's like, who controls Gavin Newsom? Okay, well, then it's probably the Democratic Party, you know? And then if you look beyond that, who controls the Democratic Party? Okay, well, then now we're talking. Okay, now we have the people who made this. Is that Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos? I don't know. It's probably those guys and 100 other guys who are all part of the web of people who fund the super elite programs.
But I mean, you don't think there's any chance that the majority of people that were in policymaking just happened to think that masks are generally effective?
No, because there was no science. There was no actual science behind it. They lied to us from the beginning and said that it was about science, when in fact there was decades of peer-reviewed studies that showed that that wasn't true.
I don't think I'll ever get over the fact that you could go into a Home Depot, Walmart, Costco, but you couldn't go get your hair done, or you couldn't go into a local store.
I agree that the playing field should have been leveled, but that's a separate conversation from masks being mandated in general. I mean, I definitely think there's a lot to be said for a lot of the research that you guys have brought up during this episode, but I mean, to assume that everyone should think that masks are ineffective because there's an obvious scientific consensus, I think, is a stretch.
Slater, I don't think they all came to that conclusion. All these politicians you're talking about came to that conclusion and these conclusions independently. I think it's more of what Tim was saying. Like, they were convinced of these conclusions by people more powerful than them, or at least their donors.
JP, did you have a question, or you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I'm just curious because I'm up in Toronto, Canada, which I don't know if you guys have heard, is a complete joke still. Do you guys still have mandatory masks going on in your areas?
Not in Iowa.
In Chicago, we do. It's getting to the point now where gyms are starting to kind of open back up, and it's kind of on a per gym basis of whether they make you wear a mask while you work out anymore. But bars, you still have to, wear a mask until you get to your table, and you have to have 6 to a table. San Francisco, or the Bay Area, which is where Tim and Tobin are and Vamsi are, and they can kind of speak on that as well. And Slater's in California also. It is much more locked down over there than anywhere else in the country.
I mean, where I'm at is pretty much exactly what you described, Lo.
Yeah, Slater's in the Central Coast.
I think I was able to go to the gym. Gyms opened pretty much last November here, at least in San Francisco. You still had to wear a mask. I got my haircuts done in April of last year when everything went into lockdown. There were like apps where the barbers came to my house and gave me a haircut. So
Vamsi, I'm 99.9% sure that was illegal. Of the haircutters, one of my friend's mothers was on that app and talked about the risks of it. Also, that blows my mind. I'm over in the East Bay, and our gyms only just opened a few weeks ago. I can't believe San Francisco beat us to that.
Yeah, but the capacity was like 10%. So basically what they did, obviously because we're the tech hub, they put out an app, and you had to like literally schedule your time. So there would be like 5, 10, 15 folks at a time in this huge ass, athletic facility.
That's incredible. Yeah, Contra Costa County, we started that, and then the county just said no, nobody at all. It was very disheartening.
Yeah, they did that back.
I'm glad San Francisco got it.
I just thought of this, and it's coming back to like the maliciousness or non-maliciousness intent for Bill Gates and Bezos and company. So our friend Bobsy here, he
mentioned that he's working on a vaccine, like blockchain thing. Basically, if you get a vaccine, it goes in the blockchain, and that way you know that you are vaccinated 100% all the way through. Vamsi, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I guarantee that if he's successful in this, the shit that people will make up about this young man will be incredible, right? That he's probably some evil person for a money grab, when in reality, Vamsi is just a funny guy who happens to be a web developer, or not a web developer,
a software
an engineer,
yeah,
and a software engineer, and just trying to do the right thing, and that he thinks that is the right thing. Many people might not agree with him, so that's where we got to toe the line. A lot of the arguments that people make hold weight on both sides, and I would like to hear, people's opinions on, that alone.
I think at the end of the day, I have heard some compelling evidence occasionally from my friends that are deeper down the conspiracy rabbit hole than I am. And I hear them out, but in general, I think that conclusion is really subjective, just based on what your perspective is in the world. I think a lot of times builders or entrepreneurs and doctors tend to support the vaccination side, and Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and people like that in general, because they have a similar vision. But I think it's always going to come down to your perspective.
But I do have to say, as frustrated I was with the state of California, I do have to congratulate them on one thing, which is, we do have over 50% of the people here that got at least their first shot. The COVID infection rate is decreasing in the Bay Area, and things are opening up more and more every day. And so, as inefficient as it was, could it have been done better? Absolutely. At least we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. I think things are pretty much going to be fully open in a couple months.
And I think anyone, if they're going to come after Vamsi too and say that he wants to take over the world or some shit, I'm going to be right in the corner saying, I've been saying that since 2016. Where the fuck have you guys been? But no, you made a good point though, Connor. When you're successful in life, people are going to come after you, and they're going to create their own narratives, and they don't care if they're wrong or if they're right. And we've seen that. I'm not going to get into recent events, but we have seen that. They don't care to hear evidence. They don't care to hear facts. Insert controversial topic in there. They just care that their emotions driven on the one side. They've made up their mind, and that's all that matters. And if they make up their mind that Vamsi is some terrible guy, or anyone up here is some terrible guy, it doesn't matter what you say to reason with them or what logic you bring their way. If they don't want to be logical, they're not going to be logical.
I think my view on good or evil is this. I feel like people are not binary. We're not a 1 or a 0, right? We're a little bit more complex than that, right? And I feel like you got to look at the intent and benefit behind the individual task or the deed, rather than judging character. And you also have to look at somebody's moral footprint before, trusting them. But yeah, I don't think anybody is good or evil, just like 100%.
Hey, Mike, let's get a coffee room breakdown.
Yeah, I'm going to say it's getting late. We've been going for about 2 hours now. We do appreciate everyone who has spoken, everyone who's been here with us. Really, really quick before we do depart, if you want to tap that greenhouse at the very top, we don't talk about COVID-19 every week. It's like we have a club that's called Teach Us Something Cool. Basically, it's just a book club, but for learning cool shit. Keeps us accountable to learn something new every single week. Really cool stuff. So, this has been a really awesome discussion we've had. If you want to go to that club, shoot us a follow so you get reminded for future discussions we have. Click on any of the moderators' names at the top, shoot us a follow. We will follow you back as well. And then if you go to my profile, you can join our Discord, which is what we used during the discussion to post links in there and resources for what we're talking about if you're unfamiliar with them. We've got a place where you can suggest future topics that you want us to discuss or that you'd like to discuss. with us. You've got a place where you can ask questions if you don't want to come on stage for any reason, or just, you can't stick around and you want us to ask it for you. Great place for you to be in general. And then we do post these discussions because they are recorded as they're posted on YouTube in there as well, so you can see them later on. And then last but not least, we do have a coffee room in there after every single Wednesday night, talk about the show, kind of wrap up our thoughts on there, and then we do discuss, the future topics for upcoming weeks. Next week's is going to be the Fermi paradox, which I don't know if anyone wants to give people an overview of that, but you got a week to study up on it. We are hoping to bring in some experts there, but from my understanding, the Fermi paradox is just, it's the theory that we need to either get off this planet, or eventually as time goes on and we progress as a society, if we don't get off and find civilization somewhere else, we're just going to destroy ourselves, unless I'm missing something. Connor, you think you understand it better than me?
Yeah, you're a little off base on that.
I got a week to study.
Yeah, it's more of our ability to move forward as a society hinders on events in the future, and we've either gotten over those hurdles and we're headed to a larger civilization, or we're waiting on a wall, and if we hit that wall, we all die. And hopefully, as a civilization, we've passed those walls that previous civilizations weren't able to get over.
And
actually, the Fermi paradox is where are the aliens? That is, you're talking about the Great Filter.
Yeah, where are yeah, exactly. Where are the aliens? As in, if we find them and there's a civilization, this is the Fermi paradox. If we find a civilization that's gone on another planet, that's very bad for us, because it means that they were wiped out by something that we have yet to run into.
Yeah, so that'll be next week. Closing thoughts on this, since we didn't really hear a lot of contrarian arguments presented, only for fun. COVID-19 confirmed here. You heard it here first. Made in a lab. Doesn't matter what the Chinese government says. Doesn't matter what the U.S. government says or suggests. It was made in a lab because Teach Us Something Cool said so. So, no, there is a lot of evidence that supports it, but that is our closing thoughts here. Thank y'all, everyone, for coming out. Join us in the Discord later. Join our Discord. Follow our club. We'd love to see you in future weeks. But until then, y'all have a great rest of your night, great rest of your day, wherever you are in the world. Have a great time in general, and we will see y'all next week. Take care.
Thank you.
Love you, Tim. Peace.
Thank you.